This program is presented by the Pryor Art Gallery on the campus of Columbia State Community College in Columbia, Tennessee, and is made possible by a grant from the Tennessee Arts Commission and through the support of the Columbia State Foundation. This is an artist studio. There are small studios like this, large studios that are contained only by the walls of an abandoned factory, and even studios no larger than a kitchen table. But regardless of the studio size, it is the space where an artist's thoughts are put to paper, where her imagination and the colors of paint are splashed across the canvas, where the bliss of creativity overcomes the awareness of time, and where both torment and joy are given visual life. This is an artist's world. Hi, this is Rusty Somerville, curator of the Pryor Gallery at Columbia State Community College. During this series, I'll visit the studios of 6 African-American artists from Nashville, Lewisburg, and Columbia, Tennessee, then down to Huntsville, Alabama, and finally, a bit further south to Kennesaw, Georgia. Each artist will discuss his work, giving insight into personal style, individual technique, use of color and composition, and also talk about personal artistic philosophy. So stay with me as we talk with and view the artwork of 6 African American artists. This is an artist's world. It's a rainy day in Nashville, and to begin our tour, we're going to visit the studio of Nashville artist and professor of art at Tennessee State University, Michael McBride. Thank you so much, Michael, for allowing us to visit your studio. Before we begin, why don't you tell us about your beautiful studio while I show some video footage of it?
Now this studio, this is probably my 4th commercial studio space. It's a great space. It's kind of a dream of mine. It's something I have to tell you about this studio. I drew out this idea of a studio that I wanted to build about 10 years ago. And I walked into this space on a humbug for something other than this, and found out this space was available, and it basically fit the profile of what I designed, what I wanted my studio to have, with multiple small studios and big space, and then a big space for myself. It's really crazy if you saw the design and saw the draw out that I was going to actually build.
Michael, why don't you start at the beginning of your career and tell us how you started?
Okay. This is painting that started this is 1993. This is right after I had finished graduate school. And I was working with color and just shapes, forming color, trying to get to a more mosaic kind of feel. So this was the beginning of study. I was looking at Picasso and looking at Aaron Douglas, kind of merging the two, where you looked at African-based ideas and design, and you think about Aaron Douglas. Then you look at Picasso with Eurocentric about color and putting things together. So I was trying to merge those two into a style of my own.
Michael, now could you talk about the piece I have in frame, this battle scene?
This piece, I decided to do the Battle of New Orleans. And so this is the one time after doing my research, which I'm a history buff, that where you had Native Americans, you had freed slaves, you actually had slaves, you had militia, and you had frontiersmen all fighting against the British at one time. I don't know of another time that happened in our history.
You use a technique that I would call overlapping plane, the use of different colored geometric patterns. You call this the kaleidoscope effect. Could you tell us a bit about this technique?
The first piece you saw in the very beginning was the start of what I call kaleidoscope painting. And basically that's about combining image and color. Normally you have to give up one for the other, but I came through experimentation, everything, where you could actually have both and not lose anything. So that's what it's called, kaleidoscope painting. So basically the process is that I actually just sketch out the images. And then the next plane is that I actually just draw lines and shapes over top of it, kind of just destroying what the image was. And then I began to just paint color. And as I began to paint color, the image begins to form. And so you start dealing with values and understanding all the art elements and balance and all of that, and you start coming up with a piece.
And this painting, titled Sinner Man, is another example of your kaleidoscope technique?
Yes, very much so.
Now, let's talk about the sepia-toned painting of Mother and Child below.
This is a copy of the original, which is at my house, and my wife won't let it go out.
That's
But it was done
beautiful.
in 1984.
Ah,
Now, this technique that I painted the jockeys in, this technique was a lady that I started working with when I was a senior in college. I was working for her. She was an artist. She came up with this technique. She invented this technique. With the Q-tips, combo paper, she invented it.
so
And
tell us about that technique with the Q-tip.
well, I call it the Harris technique because she actually invented it. So basically, it's everything is the background, everything's hand rubbed. Even the big pieces, all hand rubbed. And you only use two colors of paint, and that's cadmium yellow, light, and raw umber. That's what gives you that. So you can use black. There's no white used at all. The white is the white of the canvas. And so the whole idea is that you have to create your drawing. You have to actually, the size you're gonna do, you actually have to do the drawing. So once you've got the background rubbed out the way you want it and all the stuff, then you tape the paper on there. Then you have to trace over every line. Once you trace over every line and lift it, you have a white outline. And that's when you begin to lay paint in and stuff with Q-tips or your finger and stuff and start dealing. And it's drying as you're working, so you can't go back and correct. You got to make sure you're doing everything right.
And you got to work pretty fast.
You got to work pretty fast, and you cannot come back the next day and do anything,
Let's visit your jockey series on which you use the same sepia technique. I believe that your first painting is titled Take a Bet.
I started this idea in 1991 about black jockeys and horse racing. So I had a friend of mine named Yusef Harris, who's at Kibalon, has a bookstore called Kibalon Images down on Jefferson Street. So at Kibalon Images, that was the only place that you could find any black art, anything like that, in terms of black imagery. Basically posters and stuff like that. So I used to actually design some artwork, and he would sell it, different stuff like that. So Churchill Downs approached him about asking him if he had any imagery concerning black equestrian, And he said no, but he called me and he said, "Have you heard of it?" I said, "No, I'd never heard of black jockeys," and I hadn't. I didn't know anything about it. So I started doing my research, went to the library, and when I always tell the story, people say, "Well, why don't you look on the internet?" I said, 1991. Internet didn't come into play until 1995. So I went and looked at the books and saw this book called Race Line on horse racing. And at the very back of the book was all this about black jockeys. And and from that point on, so I said, well, I'll just go ahead and I'll just, do paintings. That's what I do, put paintings together, about the whole idea, my thought and all of that. But what happened is that eventually I got with a friend of mine who became a manager of mine, and I was with him 6 months before I even shared this with him. When I did, he spent about 6 months just thinking about it and came back. So this is a whole multimedia project. There's a movie in the play, documentary. There's been a stage play it's, we have prints, we have note cards. It's become a whole dynamic thing, from just an exhibition.
Do they sell these up at Churchill Downs?
No, Churchill Downs wanted everything for free, and so we said, no, we can't do that. But we've shown at the Derby twice, and we've been at North Carolina State. I really like the idea, being an art professor, I really like the idea of having this exhibition go to universities and colleges. I think it's much better because it's really educational.
Well, maybe we'll schedule you down at Columbia State.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
That'd be terrific,
great.
yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great to do that. So this is kind of my baby. You know, as artists, we talk about life's works and stuff like that. This is kind of my life work right here.
That's
'cause
great
it's
to have.
continual. Yeah, it's a continual.
Michael, tell us about these big, colorful graphic pieces.
These are called my iconic pieces. So what I took that from Andy Warhol. The idea of what he did with iconic pieces that he was thinking, like
Campbell's
Marilyn
soup
Monroe.
can.
Yeah, right. So I came up with my idea of iconic pieces, and all of these are like 36 by 36, which most of his pieces were about that size, you know, like that. And I did it in acrylic because he did more silkscreen, very little paint. But I wanted to get the same silkscreen feel and look. So I came up with these iconic pieces with bright colors and stuff and playing with all of that. And so that's what these are about. So this is an ongoing series. So you see James Brown, Paul Robeson, Dolly Parton, Janis Joplin, Malcolm X, Josephine Baker. And I've actually had people commission me to do themselves. All right, so I'm a preacher's kid. They call him PK.
Right.
So what I decided, this was about 25 years ago when both my father and mother both were living. My father was a bishop in the church, and I wanted to take 25 of he felt his best sermons over a 40 or 50 year period. And I was wanting to do contemporary religious images, not the cross stuff and everything, you know, contemporary. So I took each one of 25 of his sermon, my sister, he got together and he gave me 25 of his sermon with chapter, verse, and everything and all of that. So each title of each sermon will be the title of the painting. So this one, title of this piece is called, "Ye Must Be Like Sheep in Order to Know the Shepherd." So reading all the verses and everything and all of this, I came up with this image of this being the shepherd, the minister being a shepherd, and then putting sheep in, and then putting people in. If you look at the eyes of the people and sheep, they almost look like the same. And that, in order to know the shepherd. So this is the beginning of the piece. It's going to be 25 pieces. This is the very first piece. I'm doing this because I always have to have a purpose in mind. So I'm going to, once these are finished, I'm going to help raise funds for a friend of mine. It's the Temple Church here. Her husband was the pastor of Temple Church. He's passed away now, but they're building a school in South Africa, divinity school in South Africa. So I'm going to help them raise funds with this painting, these exhibitions. So that's what that's about.
Michael, you've given us a terrific look at what you do in this beautiful studio, and I'm a little jealous. But before we wrap this up, why don't you give folks your contact information just in case anyone would like to get in touch?
My number is 615-788-1397, and my email address is artist, ARTIST, the number 4, the letter U, small u, 27@gmail.com.
We've been talking with Michael McBride. Thanks again, Michael. I hope to see you again soon. What a difference a day makes. If you remember, yesterday was stormy and wet, but as you can see, today is sunny with skies of blue. In fact, it's the perfect day to visit the studio of Nashville artist and tattoo artist Elisheba Israel Mrozek. Thanks so much for allowing us to come into your studio, Elisheba. Before I show a panoramic view of the studio, I want to show a photo of you, Elisheba, and your beautiful smile. It's as bright as the day is sunny. That was Elisheba. This is her studio. In addition to being an artist, she is also a tattoo artist. She released a coloring book in 2017 titled Notable Nashville. This coloring book speaks to the historically marginalized people of Nashville. Additionally, she has released a second book, Sovereign Goddess, which is a collection of her drawings. Why don't we start with you, Elisheba? Tell us a bit about yourself, your artwork, and how your fine art relates to your tattoo art.
Absolutely. So yes, hi, I'm Elisheba Israel Morozic, and I am a tattoo artist of 10 years this year. It's been a whole decade, I can't believe it. But I have been doing art my entire life. I'm originally from Memphis, Tennessee, and art has always been a part of me. And everything has influenced me, from classical paintings like Caravaggio to anime and video games like Nobuo Uematsu and Akira Toriyama, and just artists from all cultures and societies have influenced my work. And like, my artistic practice really comes down to a few things, and it's kind of always changing because there's so many things around me that kind of influence what I do now and how I create art. But my main kind of go-to is the Black woman and what she is to the world, how she's perceived, and what the imagery surrounding us and the definition of beauty is. So that's kind of my main thing. I always want to do imagery of Black women as what they are, which is the creators of life on earth. We were the first ones. We were the beginnings of all, and yet, you know, the perceived Western societal ideas of Black women are so not that. And I just want to make sure that all of the imagery I do is a positive message, and not just one of sexuality and promiscuity, but motherhood and identity and goodness and nurturing and more. There's so much more to Black women than the color of their skin and their sexuality and promiscuity. So also, though, a big part of things that I love to do is community art and public art, and getting people engaged with art who don't normally have a chance to be a part of it. So I do like the coloring books to also engage in actively drawing and coloring, but learning about things. The history of Jefferson Street in North Nashville and how influential it was to the city as a whole. And all of that all rolls into my tattooing. Tattooing is a little different because the canvas is a human, and that canvas has to walk around and live with your artwork. But I've been very blessed to have people who will allow me to just create anything that I desire on their skin. And I still bring those same things of Black women as goddesses, Black women as queens, Black women as mothers and nurturers to the skin. And I've done and still do so many large-scale pieces of women in that way. And sorry. And so I really enjoy tattooing. I love the ephemeral aspect of it, because that piece of art walks around the world wherever it shall go, and it speaks about myself and that person, and it will end one day. It will go into the ground with them when they pass away. And so I definitely love that aspect of a traveling, moving piece that has seen more of the world than even I have, and I love that aspect of it. But I do really love the permanence of my studio practice and what I can do on other types of canvases. I really am going through a period of exploring, what so many different things mean, what's truth, because so much of things we've been taught and shown and learned are lies and are fabrications in order to control how we think and how we work and how we interact with each other here in this country and in the world. And so I'm really wanting to take my experience as a Black woman and bring it to a new level.
Why don't you talk about this new series you're starting with your husband?
So these are like our first concrete collaboration together with my husband on a painting scale. Me and him, he's a white man, and we had a lot of talks about race and what our lives were like as separate human beings coming up, and now how they meld together. And our first collaboration was this piece that we showed at the Frisch Museum at the end of last year that was all about worldview and mindset and race and how that affects how we see the world and how we comprehend things. And we were very lucky to be able to get to show it at the Frisch during a time where we could really get it into the eyes of people due to a lot of the unrest that happened last year. And that one was, I don't know why my mind just went blank, Blood at the Root. That was called Blood at the Root. And after that, we came into the studio in preparation for these bigger pieces and worked on these 5 pieces, which are called Expectations. And you have to get real close, but each of them has a poem. And here, the poem is in the eyes, the nose, the lips. So the poems and the lettering themselves fit with each of the pieces. Each one deals with a certain expectation. So this is expectation of self. This is expectation of your significant other. And then we have expectation of your leaders, expectation of your children. Because this is something, I don't do a lot of abstract, you know. It's something I want to do. I'm very kind of a picky perfectionist, so it's very hard for me to let go of the form itself. And that's probably in all aspects of my life. It's very hard for me to just let it go. I always have to.
You need structure, huh?
Yes, and I always have to be like, well, we need to do this, or I can do this better. You know, and that's how I've always kind of thought.
Alicia, but most of the work we've seen is focused on Black women. What other type projects are you involved with?
So this project just came into my hands, and I'm super excited about it. And this wonderful artist and owner of the Studio 208, Ashley Seagroves, she hit me up about this. Her studio and business was unfortunately destroyed in the the 2nd Avenue explosion, Christmas Day bombing. And so she had been gifted an amazing opportunity to have a new space down at 5th and Broadway. And she had also talked with the people over the entire County Development about developing these moving murals for Broadway. And I was given this image to paint on in order to start the celebration of the grand opening that's happening in April. And when I first got this picture, you know, they asked about one of my kind of Black women, one of my queens, to put into the image somewhere. And the first thing I thought of when I saw it was just about Broadway. And I'm just one of those people that really thinks about the history of stuff. I like to study the past and how things got to this point. And I learned all about, you know, kind of the history of Broadway and all about the Native Americans who originally owned this land and originally used it as hunting grounds and burial grounds and things like that. And also about how African Americans were sold right downtown here on Broadway and on Commerce Street and in this area, and how all of this wealth and prosperity and stuff has been built up here, and it's only now in 2021 does an African American have a business on Broadway.
As we wrap things up, let me show a couple more of Elishaba's paintings and tell you how to contact Elishaba. She can be reached at area code 901-218-4281. Thank you so much, Elishaba, and keep up the great work. Today, we're traveling to Lewisburg, Tennessee, to the studio of award-winning artist, art teacher, and former president of the Marshall County Art Guild, Felix Maxwell. Felix is the recipient of numerous awards, including a Best of Drawing Award from the Museum of Science and Technology in Chicago, awards for his work from the Pastel Society of America, and the annual Central South Art Exhibition. Felix, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about your work?
Okay, my name is Felix Maxwell and welcome to my art studio. Tell you a little bit about myself. I've been painting seems like all my life, and I've been at this studio, of course I've been remodeled a couple of times, since about 46 years. And I'm out here every day doing my thing and what I like best. And tell you a little bit about my style. My style is photorealism. And photorealism to me is being precise, being detailed. And one thing about my paintings, if you've seen them before, they kind of tell a story. And what I normally, a lot of times I work in black and white pastels with 9 shades of gray value, or either a limited palette as far as pastel is concerned, with maybe a dull or mute type color. And so really, to tell the truth, I really don't like using bright colors because sometimes get in the way of telling the actual story itself.
And what is your process of creating a piece of art?
My process is go out and take a lot of reference photos, thumbnail sketches, and then set the design up, and then go from there and start, after I take out my photographs and work from the photographs and get them developed and enlarged, I start doing the preliminary sketches. And doing preliminary sketches on tracing paper, then when I get through and have a good basis of a good drawing, I transfer it over to my canvas or either my pastel boards.
Why don't you tell us about the 2 pieces that are in front of us?
This is my self-portrait, and this makes the 3rd self-portrait I painted in pastels. I have 2 more in my other room in there. It won Best of Drawing in Chicago at the Museum of Science and Industry. Speaking of science and industry in Chicago, I'm doing a group showing up there currently now from April to actually July. And my piece of work be up there for what they call black creativity, and these black artists. We go up there every year, and I've been going up there for about 30 years. So it's one of the highlights of my life. And that piece of, like I said, won the Best of Drawing up there a few years back. I want to tell you a little bit about this piece. This is a black and white pastel, and the name of it is Ecclesiastic 3rd chapter, or you could just, some people think about it because I've sold many prints of it, as life itself. And the story behind this is I'm posing as one of the figures here, and the thing is, when you get up in the morning and when you go to bed, you never know. Life is so unpredictable. You never know what the next day may bring. So you see 3 faces there. One face is sad, one face is happy, and one is just lost. And some days it's like it. Some days you're lost, some days it's a happy occasion, some days you might have got news of a death in the family or something like that.
Before we go further, Felix, let me film your studio so folks have an idea of your working space.
What you're looking at now, this is my framing room where I frame my pictures, and also where I display some of the frame pieces. This is another one of my pieces. This is a black and white pastel painted with black and white and then 9 shades of gray pastel. It's entitled Maybe Tomorrow. And Maybe Tomorrow is the theme is talking about, this is a homeless guy that was on 2nd Avenue, and we talked for a while, and he said that maybe he would get off the streets the next day. And I hope he decided to do that because, you know, I kind of liked the guy. He was a really nice guy, and I thought he made a great painting. This is another one of my pastels. This is a pastel that I painted in several years back. It's titled Roscoe and Moses. This is, of course, is Roscoe, and I named him Moses because of his beard. He looks like a figure person, like some kind that's wise and old. But I used to see him sitting on the porch like every day, and finally got enough nerve up to go up and ask him could I take his photographs. He said, yeah, right away. So I took a lot of reference photos, and this is what turned out. I thought the dog was always with him. Everywhere he go, you would see, a lot of times he'd go for walks, and the little dog would be on a leash, but you know, they always be together. Okay, this is another one of my pastels. Like I said, it's black and white pastels, 9 shades of gray. It's entitled Juno, the goddess of women. And I got this idea when I went to Panoply in Huntsville, Alabama. The lady here that is dressed in this costume, she's there every year. And she's like a goddess. And she let me take a photograph. Now I added 2 of friends to go to our church in with her. So it's one of my favorite pieces. This is one of my pastels. Me and my wife went to the Jazz Fest in Atlanta, Georgia. And this piece is called Atlanta Jazz Fest. It's a pastel. Actually, I took the photographs of just a couple, and then I added in more figures as I went along. So this is one of my pieces I really like.
And finally, Felix, do you have any new art that you could tell us about?
Okay, this is one of my new pieces I'm working on. Actually, I did the drawing last week, and then I transferred over to my pastel paper. It'll be in pastel. This is a reference piece, and the title of this piece is Dance Machine. And me and my wife went to a class reunion, and this couple danced the full time we was there. So I thought with all the color lights and the background, and actually the figures dancing, it would make a really nice pastel painting. And I'm working on it. It'll be 22 by 30 unframed. So hopefully I can finish it up in about another couple of weeks.
Well, Felix, that about wraps it up. Thank you so much for your time and allowing us to visit with you in your studio. If anyone would like to contact Felix, his phone number is area code 931-215-9987, and his web page can be found at maxwellshouseofart.com. That concludes part 1 of this 2-part series, An Artist's World. Stay tuned for part 2.